Hi, welcome to Keto Life Support, where we make your keto life sustainable, fun, and low stress. I'm Kim Howerton from theketonis.com, and I'll be coming to you weekly with some of my keto besties to bring you the practical, real-world keto advice that you need. Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor, and even if we have a doctor in the house, he or she is not your doctor, and nothing on this show should be taken as medical advice. Always check with a trusted medical professional about your personal medical concerns. Hello, this is Kim Howerton with Keto Life Support, and today we're bringing you an episode that Dr. Barry and I recorded about a month ago on Facebook Live, and it is super duper fun, a little chat we did about Keto Flu, and we thought everyone should get a chance to hear this, so we decided to share it on the podcast as well. I hope you enjoy. And I have to apologize in advance. We end rather abruptly because the sound quality cut out really badly, and I didn't want to subject anybody to that, so we don't say goodbye at the end. So I'll say it now. Goodbye when you reach the end of this recording. Okay, jumping in, here we go. So today, Dr. B and I want to talk to you about
Keto Flu.
Ooh, it's a good one.
What the heck is it? What causes it? What you can do about it?
Absolutely. So some of you might be already pretty experienced and through the stage where you think keto flu is an issue, but I betcha there is somebody in your life who asks you about keto and you sort of stumbled through those early stages and you want to do better by them next time.
Yep, absolutely. And I didn't realize this, Kim Howerton, the ketonist, but there are people out there who have seen their friends and family improve their health with a ketogenic way of eating, but they're afraid to try it because they are scared to death of the keto flu because they read some stupid article on Pop Sugar or in Women's Day Circle, whatever, Family Magazine, and now they're scared. They're like, that can't be safe. If it causes you to have something like that, it must be a dangerous fad diet. And so that I think it's time we talked about this and explained to people what exactly is going on, why it's happening, why it's not dangerous at all, and then a few strategies that'll help people cope with this very short-term issue as they enjoy all the benefits of a ketogenic way of eating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I like to tell people, because you'll see in various keto groups, somebody will say, "Oh, I have a really bad headache," and some people will say something like, "Oh, yeah, that's normal. It'll go away." And it's sort of like saying, I have a horrible illness. Let's just try and see it through. Like, no, there are actually things you can do to fix it.
Yes, there are things you can do to make it better. Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. But my theory is that some of this, and we'll get into this in a minute, some of this is just part of the process of moving from an unhealthy diet to a healthy diet.
Right.
And so I think this is going to be an interesting discussion.
So keto flu is called keto flu, kind of colloquially. That's sort of the term for it. I prefer to call it carb withdrawal.
Yeah, that's a much better term. And I'm all about language, and I think that we should all start calling it carbohydrate withdrawal, because in my opinion, that's where at least 80, if not 90% of the symptoms come from.
Mm-hmm. So what are the symptoms of carb withdrawal / keto flu that are generally seen?
So if anybody has ever stopped smoking cigarettes or used to be a heavy drinker and they stopped that, then they could actually type in the comments because the withdrawal symptoms that they experienced are going to be exactly the withdrawal experiences that you might experience with the keto flu or carb withdrawal. I just posted a new video on YouTube about the keto flu, and I talk about this stuff. And doing the research for that video, I actually found out that when people are quitting cigarettes, there is a syndrome known as quitter's flu.
Huh.
Not a joke. I've been practicing medicine for 20 years, but I'd never heard that term, Quitter's Flu. And you can look that up on a search engine, and there it is. Literally, it's word for word the symptoms of going from a carbohydrate heavy diet to a ketogenic diet. It's the same exact syndrome of symptoms. And so when somebody quits drinking alcohol, they're going to have these same kind of symptoms. And so I think we really all need to come to terms with the fact that definitely sugar and processed grain carbohydrates are habit forming.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's enough science to support that. I think there's enough PET scans of the pleasure centers of the human brain lighting up and glowing in the dark when you eat processed carbs, sugars, grains, bread, to say, yeah, this is a dopamine thing. This is a serotonin thing. You are addicted to those carbohydrates. And so the classic symptoms would be headache, nausea, jitteriness, anxiety, irritability. You've heard the expression hangry. That's carbohydrate. That's your monkey talking to you, saying, hey, eat some carbs, eat some bread, eat some fruit. So that's what that is. Some people have a little nausea. A lot of people have constipation. A lot of people have insomnia. And typically the keto flu, just like the cigarette quitter's flu or the flu-like syndrome you get when you're quitting alcohol, lasts from 3 to 10 days. And there are things you can do to make it less noticeable, less severe, and easier to get through. But you have an addiction.
Yeah.
Therefore, the only way to get from being an addict to being a recovering carbohydrate addict is to go through this 3 to 10 day period when you might not feel great. And I love the analogy of the cigarette smoker who's, on day 3 of quitting and they feel like shit. And their friend is like, dude, this quitting cigarettes, it shouldn't make you feel this bad. This must be bad for you. Here, have a Marlboro. It'll make you feel better. And then they're like, yeah, I guess he's right. It's unhealthy to quit smoking. I should just keep smoking because when I try to quit smoking, I feel crappy. See, that's terrible, terrible logic. But so many people, if they're trying to break their carbohydrate addiction, their friends will be like, why don't you just eat some bread? God, this looks like torture. This can't be healthy.
Right.
This fad ketogenic diet must be bad for you. Your body's telling you you need carbohydrates. And it's your addiction telling you that it's time for your Q2-hour carbohydrate infusion, or you're going to start having withdrawal symptoms.
Absolutely. Now, I will say, I think there are actually 2 separate issues that get wrapped up into one package.
Yep.
There's carb withdrawal, which is a thing you have to deal with, and there's electrolyte imbalance.
Yes, and I agree totally. And I think there's actually a third, which is salt depletion, which is still kind of an electrolyte issue, but exactly. But I think that's the 3 big things, and you're having to deal with them all at the same time. Yeah. And so that's what makes it especially challenging. And now some people, if they were already eating kind of a paleo, ancestral, bulletproof diet, then they don't really have this withdrawal thing. They may still have the electrolyte issue and the salt issue, but they don't have the hard withdrawals. And so you'll hear people say, well, I didn't have keto flu. I transitioned from whatever, and I never had that. And I think that's people who are already eating relatively low carb anyway, and so they didn't have that deep addiction to the sugar and the grains.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, it's so funny, I didn't think that I got much keto flu, but I tend to be pretty conscious of what's happening in my body. So I was just like, I am a total bitch right now. And I will be for a while. Like, I knew what was happening, so it didn't manifest so much as confused symptoms. But I do think there's a bit of a mind-body thing that if you can get really clear on what's happening, sometimes it hurts less.
Yes, and that's actually one of the things I talk about in the YouTube video. That's a definite strategy for coping with this. Is first and foremost, you yourself knowing what's going on and knowing what to expect. If you'll type in a search engine withdrawal symptoms, read the list, and then when you start to have those, you won't be in the dark. You'll know, oh, I'm withdrawing from carbohydrates. That's what that is. Okay, so I now that I know what it is, it's not nearly as hard to tolerate. Whereas if you just are in the dark and you're like, why do I feel like crap? This sucks. Then you don't really, you don't have that, you don't have the intellectual leg to stand on. All you know is how you feel.
Well, I also think that one of the things that can happen emotionally when you have symptoms that you can't quite identify the cause of is it ramps up your anxiety. And yes, then anxiety definitely is sort of a symptom amplifier, because now you're extra anxious and jittery and nauseous, and it's like an exponentiation.
Yeah. And so many people will just quit at that point unless they know this information and know what to do about it. And I don't blame them. If you were just in the dark trying to do this on your own, and you'd be like, God, this sucks. This is terrible. I hate this. And then, like you said, when you start to get upset, that's just going to magnify all the symptoms and make you worry more about them. And you think, well, and another very common sign of withdrawal from any addictive substance is tachycardia, your heart beating faster.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're already anxious, and then you feel your heart beating faster, and you're like, I'm going to die at any minute. I got to quit this. And so I think a lot of people give up on keto prematurely because they didn't know about the keto flu. They thought that, if I just take my electrolyte drops and eat more salt, I'll be okay. And I think those things are vital. But you have to understand part of what you're going through is carbohydrate addiction withdrawal symptoms, and you just got to tough that out. And we'll talk about strategies a little later about how you can make that less bad to do.
Right. And it's just a reminder too that emotional piece, it's constant, right? Once an addict, I think you always sort of have these tendencies. And like for me, going carnivore, the first week I'm bitchy again. And then when I gave up dairy, like I was like a cat climbing the walls and leaving like deep gouges in the wallpaper.
Yeah. And I did not have that. I'm doing a dairy-free month right now. I'm about 2.5 weeks in, and I didn't have any withdrawal symptoms whatsoever with the dairy. But when I went from keto to carnivore, for about 3 to 5 days, I was a little bitchy, and I didn't feel great. And so I think a lot of people are doing what they consider to be a keto diet, but they've listened to some bad advice, and they're eating 7 to 10 cups of salad a day, and their keto's very veg heavy. And vegetables have carbs. I'm sorry, they do. And those carbs count.
I can totally soothe the carb demon with a big old salad.
Oh, exactly right. Exactly right. A big old salad, and then maybe a few nuts, maybe a few berries on there. All that's keto. And you've just eaten a huge load of monkey satisfying carbs, but you felt like you don't feel like, oh, I messed up because you ate all this salad and nuts and berries, and they're supposed to be keto. But for some people, that is enough to bring back up the carb addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got this emotional and physiological. I mean, people will often say like, oh, it's all in your head, as if that means it shouldn't be hard.
Yeah. This is definitely a biochemical, physiological thing. You can say it's all in your head, and I'm not sure how that's supposed to help. I've never understood that statement, but this is a knowable biochemical thing. Your brain, your pleasure centers are receiving pleasure every time you have a spike in your blood sugar and your insulin, every time you eat a big load of carbs, whether that's sugar cookies or whether that's 10 cups of salad. You are feeding that carbohydrate addiction. And so that's a known thing. I mean, we can put you in a PET scanner and we can watch the pleasure centers of the deeper parts of your brain light up when you eat those carbs. I think we're hardwired to do this because, 50,000 years ago, the carbohydrates in the late summer and fall, when the few little sour apples got ripe and a few berries, we needed to crave that.
Right.
We needed to crave that, right? So that we could gorge on that and gain 5 or 10 pounds of fat, so that then we could go through the winter when there would be no carbs and probably very little food, period, without starving to death. We would store up that energy in the form of stored fat. And back then, that was a good thing. But now with the McWindy Kings on every corner, that's not a good thing anymore to store all that extra fat. We don't need that extra fat. But I think we're hardwired to crave carbs and to become addicted to them. That used to be a survival strategy for us. But now it actually makes us fat and sick and inflamed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once upon a time, kids needed to get as chubby as possible because it wasn't possible to get that chubby so that they could survive into being, of reproductive age.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Back in when times were actually hard.
Right.
And now we have there's food everywhere.
Yeah.
Even if you live in a food desert that we hear talked about, there's still pseudo food-like products everywhere that can satiate that addiction and also satiate your hunger, but only for 2 to 4 hours.
Right.
And so people feel like they're eating, but they're really just feeding the addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people, you mentioned this earlier, and you're absolutely right. I've seen it over and over again. People who let that fear of keto flu stop them from actually starting keto.
Yes.
So what advice would you give them?
My advice would be to do some research, watch some of Kim's videos, join a keto group, watch my YouTube video. And to understand that there's 3 different parts to going keto. And so we've covered the addiction part. I think people get that. And I wanted to point out one other key symptom of withdrawal, and that's itching and a rash.
Oh.
Whether it's cigarettes, whether it's alcohol, whether it's crack cocaine, when you are withdrawing, it is very common for people who are in the thralls of withdrawal, sorry, as a southern rhyme, that to itch and to complain of a rash. And then when you look, there's not really a rash there. Maybe it's a very diffuse, rashy like area, but there's no rash. And so I think that now that I look back, I think 100% of the people who said, I've got this keto rash, that was part of their withdrawal symptom that they were going through. And as you've heard in the past, Kim, keto rash lasts from 3 to 10 days. And it's gone, and it's part of the carbohydrate withdrawal. So now the second thing, let's talk about the electrolytes.
Right, because this is a physiological thing, right? When you first go keto, your insulin drops, and you experience is it called diuresis?
Yeah. So when you eat a bunch of carbs, that spikes your blood sugar. Right? And then immediately your pancreas says, whoa, and your beta cells secrete a lot of insulin and to take care of the blood sugar. But people don't realize the insulin actually has hundreds of functions in your body. And one of the things that it does is it helps you to hold on to excess fluid. And so when your insulin is chronically high from eating too many carbohydrates on a daily basis, you're going to hold anywhere from 3 to 10 pounds of extra unneeded fluid. And that shows up on the scale. Yes, it does. But it also shows up in your ankles as edema. It shows up in your fingers. You can't get your rings off. It can show up in around the waistline for some people if they hold the edema there. Also kind of here
around the eyes.
Puffiness under the eyes, absolutely. That's from chronically high insulin. And after years of doing this, me and Kim can spot somebody across the room who has hyperinsulinemia. You can just tell by looking at them. And I don't know if you were at that conference.
I was.
But a lady came up and asked me. Yeah. She came up and asked me a question. And I looked at her ankles and I'm like, well, you're still eating too many carbs. I can tell you right now. And she's like, well, how do you know that? And she came up to me later. She's like, how do you know? I'm like, you still have way too much edema. I said, do you have heart failure? Do you see a cardiologist? And she's like, no. I had a stress test and an echo. They said my heart was fine. So therefore it wasn't heart failure. She's eating too many carbs and her insulin's still staying chronically high. And she was somebody who had bought into the 7 to 10 cups of salad a day. And she was wearing the salad and the seeds and the nuts out thinking that was keto, but she was still hyperinsulinemic. So when somebody like that really cuts down the carbs and gets them down to 20 total grams or less a day, their insulin starts to come down. And when that happens, you'll start to pee off that extra fluid that you don't need, that you've been holding, that's actually hard on your heart. It actually makes your heart work harder for you to have all that extra fluid in your body. And the way the human kidney works is when you pee off fluid, a certain amount of magnesium and potassium have to go with that fluid. That's just the way the human kidney functions. And so most people in modern society are depleted in magnesium and potassium to start with.
So now you're peeing
and
out
so when they have,
more of the little supply you have.
Right. And then when you have this diuresis, that you're right, that's what it's called, then you pee out too much of your magnesium and potassium. And that's just your body getting back to normal fluid status. And that's a good thing long term, but you can have some consequences short term, some symptoms. Typically it's muscle twitches, muscle spasms, muscle cramps. And that's typically what you'll notice. Headache is another big one. And the problem is the headache is part of the carbohydrate withdrawal symptom, but it can also be from the electrolyte depletion. And so that's one of the ways you can make the keto flu less uncomfortable is by making sure that you either eat lots of foods rich in magnesium or potassium, which would be my preference that you do, or use some sort of electrolyte replacement drop like Keto Chow's electrolyte drops or fasting drops so that you know you're getting enough magnesium and potassium. Another thing that's happening when you stop eating all of the inflammatory foods in the standard Western diet is that the level of chronic inflammation in your body starts to decrease. Now, there's 4 cardinal signs of inflammation. There's redness, there's heat, there's pain, and there's edema, swelling, right? And so when you start to decrease the inflammation in your body, again, you're going to have that diuresis. You're going to pee out that unnecessary, unwanted fluid. And again, the way the human kidney works, you're going to lose magnesium and potassium with that fluid. And so there's 2 reasons within the electrolyte. It's the chronically high insulin you're fixing, but it's also the chronic inflammation you're fixing. And so you gotta have a plan, a strategy to make sure you're getting enough magnesium and potassium. And there are other electrolytes, but if you're getting those 2, all the rest of them are going to come along for the ride.
Absolutely. I do think that, and I include, when I talk electrolytes, I include sodium in that mix.
Yeah.
And more than anything, I find anecdotally, carrying around some salt, and anytime you feel a little bit iffy, throwing some salt in your mouth seems to be very helpful.
100%. Another great strategy for the 3 to 10 days that you might have keto flu symptoms is always having a little container of salt, and I don't have mine with me. I would show you, but you want to use a real salt like we've talked about in other videos, but you don't want to use Umbrella Girl salt because most of it actually has sugar in it. It has maltodextrin or dextrose to keep it from clumping together. So you don't want that, but you want to use a real salt that's local to wherever you live. And everybody knows, it seems like they know about magnesium and potassium, but they don't realize that sodium and chloride are actually much, much more important. So a normal lab level for magnesium and potassium, 3.5, 4.5. A normal sodium is 135. A normal chloride is 110, 115. So you need 5 times, 10 times as much sodium and chloride as you do magnesium and potassium. And that's why salt becomes so important. Even if you're using the electrolyte drops, you still need to salt all of your food to taste, because your taste buds will tell you how much salt you need. But during the 3 to 10 days of the keto flu, you need to actually have a little packet of salt that you carry around with you, like Kim just said. I agree 100%. And when you have that headache or when you have that fatigue, a big pinch in your hand or on your tongue will help you feel much better within minutes.
Yeah. And Redmond's real salt is my favorite, I will say. And they have these little individual packets that you can get on their website. And did you have some thing you were doing with it? Somebody just called it a berry bundle of Redmond's real salt, but
yeah, they actually put together a bundle of all of my favorite Redmond stuff. And if you want me to, I'll send you a link.
Okay, we'll put a link
after, and you can put it in the show notes and people can check it out. And if I lived in Asia, then I wouldn't use Redmond's real salt. I would use real pink Himalayan sea salt, right? Because that would be the local salt to me. But if you live in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, then Redmond's is the closest real salt that you can buy. So it's kind of our local salt. That's how I talk about it. And so if you're concerned about Mother Earth, which I'm very much concerned, I want to take care of our planet, then you don't want to be shipping salt across the ocean to you. you want to buy as local a salt as you can get. And that's why I love Redmond's. But if I ever move to Asia, then I'll start using pink Himalayan.
Sounds good. Yeah. So some people are asking about amounts and quantities and whatever. Dr. Barry and I will post some links, and I have an infographic. There are some sort of like standard amounts of stuff to get. It's easier in a picture than for us to say it and then you forget it. So I'll post some of those links in the video after we're done.
Perfect. Perfect.
So what else? So some people are asking about high blood pressure and should I still take salt?
Yes, definitely. Salt in reality. So remember back when I said that if you're eating too many carbs, you're going to have a chronically high insulin level and you're going to have chronically high inflammation levels. Not good inflammation, but bad chronic inflammation. Both of those are going to make you hold a lot of fluid. And so if you're still eating the stupid American diet, then you may need to limit your salt because you have all this extra fluid in your body. But one of the beautiful things about switching to the keto diet or the carnivore diet, both of which I consider to be part of the proper human diet, is that you get to eat salt to taste. You don't have to worry about the salt raising your blood pressure. You don't have to worry about the salt increasing your risk of heart attack or stroke because it doesn't work that way. Only if your insulin and your inflammation levels are chronically high, that's what causes high blood pressure in about 9 out of 10 people. Is chronically high insulin level from too many carbs. The salt has very little, if anything, to do about it. And there's a book that Kim and I are pretty good buddies with, James D. Nicolantonio. He's a PhD researcher at where is he at? I don't know if he's at Mayo or not.
He's also a pharmacist, and he's and he writes a ton of research papers. But he basically dug into the high blood pressure research. Salt does not cause high blood pressure. That's a silly medical superstition. It's a medical myth. And a lot of doctors believe that. Your doctor may very well have told you that. But get the Salt Fix by Dr. James D. Nicolantonio and read that, and you'll never be afraid of salt again. It's just a silly superstition. And if you were able to go back in time to the 1940s, 1930s, 1920s, anytime during the past and ask people, is salt bad for you? They would go, no. Why would you think that? It's a fad that started in the 50s and 60s and really took off in the 70s and 80s, that salt it will cause high blood pressure and salt is bad for your heart. But there's no meaningful research to back it up at all. Yeah, in fact, Andrew Mentee there's a study, right, the PURE study, P-U-R-E. It's a huge study. Now, it is epidemiological, but still, it's a very big one. And it showed or worldwide is what I meant to say, that people who had over twice as much salt as the American recommendation for sodium, so twice the recommendation for sodium, were healthier, lived longer, and did better. And Absolutely. That amount is about the amount of salt that Dr. Barry and I tend to recommend because it seems to be optimal for people. It seems to be the amount that human beings actually need for optimal function. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And even patients with severe congestive heart failure do worse when you put them on a very salt-restricted diet. They don't do as well. They don't live as long. They don't feel as good. Even people with heart failure need salt. Someone asked about bradycardia. Is bradycardia low heart rate? Yeah. So there are hundreds of causes of a low heart rate. Some people are just in very good shape and have that naturally. In other cases, after you have a heart attack in a certain part of the heart, you can have bradycardia. There are multiple conditions that can cause you to have a low or a slow heart rate. Salt is not one of the things that causes that. Salt also doesn't cause tachycardia, which is a fast heart rate. Salt does not do that. Your heart needs sodium and chloride to function properly. If I were to reach into your body, Kim, and pull all the sodium and chloride out of your body magically, you would be dead within minutes. Yeah. Literally dead on the floor within minutes. You have to have a sodium level of 135 to function properly. And you have to have a chloride level of 110, 115 to function properly. Sodium chloride, that's salt. That's why every mammal craves salt and will walk for miles to get it. Yeah, absolutely. There are, I understand, a very small percentage of the population that has some, I don't know what it is, but has some salt sensitivity, but it's a vanishingly small number of people that find they're sensitive. Yeah,
it's 1 in 1,000. But the problem is we don't know the carbohydrate intake and the insulin level of those people.
Right.
And so they may, in fact, for them even, it may just be chronic hyperinsulinemia and chronic inflammation causing them to hold so much fluid that then a little bit of salt will make their blood pressure. And there's no doubt if you eat more salt, your blood pressure will go up 1 or 2 points.
Yeah.
But that's not dangerous. That's a known thing. And so, but that doesn't matter to just the individual person we're talking to tonight, right? Yeah. But if you're an epidemiologist and you're studying 100,000 people, then that can be meaningful in that respect. Right. But just for the average person with a spouse and a dog and a job, just living their life, whether your blood pressure is 133 or 134 is meaningless to your long-term risk of heart attack and stroke, which is what we're all trying to avoid anyway, right? So when you salt restrict somebody, and Dr. D. Nicolantonio talks about this in his book beautifully, when you restrict your salt intake, your cortisol levels go up and your adrenaline levels go up. And both of those will cause tachycardia and will stress your heart and can increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. So actually salt restriction is much less healthy than eating salt to taste, which is what all mammals do. That's what we should do also.
Right. It is really funny. There was a few days ago, I was like craving salt and I put some salt in my mouth and I literally felt like I had put sugar in my mouth. It tasted sweet. Yep. And I was like, oh, that is a sign that I was really low on salt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So keto flu equals carbohydrate withdrawal, wonky electrolytes, very important in that initial stage. What else do people need to think about when they're dealing with that transition into the keto way?
Another thing that people do that makes it harder to stick to keto is they consider it a diet, right? And I don't blame them for that. I understand they're trying to lose fat and they're like, I want to go on this keto diet and lose some fat. But for many people, and I think this is more common in women, but I think it's all people, when you say the word diet, we immediately think about portion
restriction,
control, restriction, cutting back, pushing away sooner, all that stuff. One of the beautiful things about the ketogenic way of eating is you don't have to do that. You get to eat until you're full. You get to eat full portions of fatty meat. You don't have to have a little palm-sized portion of skinless chicken breast. You don't have to do that. You can eat 5 chicken legs with the skin on. That's keto. You can eat the whole ribeye with the fat. That's keto. Because what you don't want to be doing, because you're going to have to fight this withdrawal. You're going to have to just stick that out, right? Most people can do that. If they understand what's going on, they can do that. But what most people cannot do, and what the reason most people fail, is not only are they going through the carbohydrate withdrawal, but they're also restricting their portion sizes and they're cutting back. And so not only are they withdrawing, but they're also hungry. Now, let me tell you guys something. Hunger is hardwired. We will, if we get hungry enough, we will eat our neighbor. This has happened hundreds of times. You will eat the leather off the bottom of your shoe. You will eat grass. You will eat cardboard. There are, so many case reports of this happening. Hunger is not something, it doesn't mean you have a lack of willpower if you give in to your hunger. That is hardwired. You cannot beat your hunger. You cannot win that.
No.
Okay? So if you're withdrawing and you're hungry, you're going to fail. That's going to happen. And so one of the main things you got to do when you start eating keto is eat your full portion. Eat until you're comfortably stuffed. And that may slow down your fat loss for a week or two. But you got to remember for those, let's just say 14 days, when you convert, you're fighting the withdrawal symptoms. You sure don't want to be hungry at the same time because you will fail.
Right. And you kind of have the benefit, there's like a little signing bonus, right, to keto is those first 14 days or so, you're dropping the water weight. So the scale is going down. And so then you keep going and, then the fat loss kicks in. And so it's all part of a process, but I 100% agree with you. Like, the strategy I took my first week of keto was anytime I thought about putting carbohydrates in my mouth, I put some fat in my mouth.
Perfect.
Just because I was like, look, I can deal with meal timing next week. I can deal with how much I'm eating next week. My number one goal this week is to not eat carbs.
100%. So if anybody watching is thinking about trying keto, I want you to fry up 5 pounds of bacon and put it in a Ziploc bag in the fridge. I want you to have a bunch of boiled eggs, make deviled eggs, make egg salad. I want you to have all of this reach and get stuff ready so that and so just like Kim just said, the minute you think, I think I'm hungry, go eat some fat right then. Go have 2 or 3 strips of bacon. Go have a little spoonful of butter. It doesn't matter, but what you're trying to do is not be hungry, because if you're hungry and you're having withdrawal symptoms, you'll fail.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I think is super important that Dr. Berry pointed out is this is a way of life. This is a change. It's a lifestyle change. One of the mistakes I think people do is they short-term think everything. So they'll go into it thinking, well, I have to do this fast. I have to get into ketosis as fast as possible. I have to do this fast, because everybody has this idea that they want to lose weight as fast as possible, which is human and normal, and it's going to screw you up.
I agree. And I think there's probably 2 kinds of people. And so if you are a teetotaler, if you're a cold turkey type person, then you might do that. You still need to have all of our other strategies in place. But for most people, and I'm sure I'm one of those people, it's not a foul if it takes you 3 months to convert over to keto, or a full solid month of slowly lowering the carbs and slowly upping the fat. That's okay. That is a perfectly good strategy for, I'd say, most people. Is you don't have to do this overnight. You don't have to just go in your kitchen and throw every carb in the garbage. You don't have to do that. Each time you go to the grocery, buy all fat and buy less carbs, and before long, it'll be a month or 2 in the future, and you're 100% keto, and it makes it much easier to do for most people, I think.
Yeah, and for me, I am a black and white kind of girl in a lot of ways, and so I had to go fairly cold turkey. Now, I included things like whipped cream and, all the kind of like indulgent keto stuff. And I made some keto treats, but I had to be like, that over there is not food anymore. All the things on that list, not food. And so you have to know your personality a little bit to know which way you're going to go.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a very important point. This is not a short-term diet that you're going to do for 3 to 6 months. Basically, what we're encouraging you to do is to revert back permanently to the proper human diet, because the stuff that Kellogg's and Kraft and Post advertise on TV is not food for human beings.
Yeah.
Orange juice is not food for human beings. Coke, no. Lunchables, no. Frozen dinners, none of that crap is food. Those are industrially made, factory made, food-like products that big corporations sell. I don't want you to ever go back to eating that. If you lose 150 pounds of fat and you hit your ideal weight and you feel great, good. Keep doing what got you there. Don't start eating that crap again, because you'll fall right back into the old traps. You'll become re-addicted. You'll start gaining back the fat and the inflammation, and before long you'll be sick again. We're trying to encourage a complete and total and permanent lifestyle change, because there is a human diet that we're supposed to eat, and there's a bunch of shit that we're not ever supposed to eat, or maybe eating once a year for our anniversary or birthday. That's it.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us on Keto Life Support. If you'd like more, you can join our friendly Facebook group, Keto Life Support. Can't find it? Go to ketolifesupport.com. If you ever want to suggest a topic for discussion, that would be the place to do it. We'd really, really appreciate it if you would go to your podcast app and subscribe, because that's awesome. And what would be super awesome is if you'd be so kind as to write a review for us. Though we would love it if that review was awesome, just writing a review is all we ask. So have a fabulous keto week, and we'll see you next time.